Hello everyone, welcome back to today's live session. Okay, so today's topic is a very important topic, when to use static function. Because when we know when to use the things where we can write much neat and cleaner code. In this class, we'll explore one of the most interesting and slightly confusing topics in Python, which is static function, also known as static methods. So, before we jump into coding, let's understand why static functions exist and when we should actually use them. Okay, so let me firstly tell you what is static function. Because before diving into any of the topic, we should firstly understand what it really means. So a static function or a static method in Python is a method that belongs to a class but does not depend on the class instance or its attribute. Okay, so what basically it means is it is a function or a method that belongs to a class but it does not fully depends upon the class instant or its attribute. So this was the simple definition of static function. In more deeply, a static function is defined inside the class, yet it behaves like regular function that just happen to be grouped under the class namespace. You can call it using the class name itself without creating an object. In short, we can say a static function in Python is a function that has a logical connection with the class but does not need access to instance, self or class data. Now I'll tell you why static function exists in Python. Okay, so let me tell you, Python treats everything as an object, including classes and functions, but sometimes what happens is you have a function that conceptually belongs to a class, yet it does not need to access the instance or modify the class itself. What they do is they allow us to keep the function inside the class or logical organization, or basically it avoids giving unnecessary access to instance variable, and it also maintain cleaner and safer design by making it clear that the method doesn't modify the object of the class. No problem. You can watch the videos afterward also. I'm very well fine. How about you all? Okay, so now listen carefully. I'll tell you when to use static function. Okay, so there are some specific scenarios where static functions are right tool. So I'll tell you some of them. So firstly, the first and foremost most important thing when to use static function is when the function is logically related to the class but doesn't use its data. Okay, so suppose the function helps in performing an operation related to what the class represent, but it does not require any of its attribute or method. So a basic and simple example, we can say that a class which had math utils might logically group mathematical helper functions that don't depend on any instance. So this is the most common and pure reason to use static methods, logical grouping and organization. And secondly, when you want to create utility or helper method. So static method are perfect for small and self-contained utility functions. So basically like validation, conversion, formatting, calculation and parsing. When we use all these methods, so we use static function because they are self-sufficient. They promote encapsulation and code readability, keeping all relevant functionality inside one class rather than scattered across module. Okay, so third main reason when to use static function is when function does not need self or class. So if a function doesn't need to access or modify instant data, so we use self, or when to access modify class level data, we use class. Then making it an instance or class method is unnecessary and confusing. So defining it as static method makes the intent explicit. This is method independent. This enhances code clarity and communicates design intent to other reading in your code. Fourthly, we use static function when you want to keep the code within a class logical boundary. So you could place such a function outside the class, but if it conceptually belongs to the class or it improves discoverability by grouping behavior together, then it makes more sense to define it inside the class as a static method. So this is a namespace advantage. Static method help organize the code inside the right logical container. And there are a lot of time when to use static function and sometimes when not to use static functions also. Okay, so now we'll move on to some quiz session so that we can test our knowledge. Okay, so the first question is, can a static method access instance variable directly? Okay, so the first question is, can a static method access instant variable directly? You have to answer in yes or no in the chats. Can a static method access instance variable directly? Okay, so what would be the correct answer? You can answer in yes or no in the chats. Okay, so let me tell the correct answer. So the correct answer of this is no. You cannot access a static method directly with instance variable. Now we'll move on to the second question. So the second question is, do static method require the self parameter? Do static method require the self parameter? So I have explained you the static functions and when to use static methods, and now we are switching to the quiz session, so you have to answer its output in yes or no in the chats. Do static method require the self parameter? Can you tell me the correct answer? Do static method require the self parameter or not? You have to answer in yes or no. Okay, so let me tell you the correct answer. So the correct answer of this is no. Okay, so now we'll move on to the third question. So the third question is, can static method be called without creating an object? Can static method be called without creating an object? Okay, so the third question is, can static method be called without creating an object? What will be the correct answer of this? You can answer in yes or no in the chats. Okay, so now I will tell you the correct answer. So the correct answer of this is yes. Static method can be called without creating an object also. Now we'll move on to the fourth question. So the fourth question would be, should you use static method for tasks that depend on instant data? Should you use static method for tasks that depend on instant data? Okay, so the fourth question is, should you use static method for tasks that depend on instant data? You have to answer its output in the chat in yes or no. Should you use static method for tasks that depend on instant data? What would be the correct answer? Yes or no? Okay, so let me tell you the correct answer. So the correct answer of this is no. You should not use static method for tasks that depend on instant data. Okay, so the next question for today would be, is it possible to call a static method through both the class and an instance? Is it possible to call a static method through both the class and an instance? This is the next question for today. Okay, so now I'll tell you the correct answer of this. So the correct answer of this is yes, it is possible to call a static method through both the class and instance. Okay, now we'll move to the practice session. So firstly, we'll take a basic example to understand static method. Okay, so this is a simple example of static method. Now you have to answer its output in the chat. And also I'll explain you the code. So here, at the rate static method, this means this function does not depend on the instance or the class. It simply performs an operation using the parameters passed to it. So the function add belongs to the class namespace mathutils, not to any object of it. And at last, when we print this, we are calling the static method directly using the class name. So no need to create an object. Now you understood what the code is doing. Now you have to answer its output in the chat. Okay, so what will be the correct answer? Can anyone answer its output in the chat? This is very simple and very basic question, and I already told you what the code is doing in this. So I think this would be easy for you all to answer. Okay, so let's see what output does this will give. Okay, so the correct answer is 15. Okay, so now we'll see another example. So the next example we'll see is without creating an object. Okay, so now you have to answer its output in the chat, and this in this example we are creating no object, means without object we are creating this. I'll also explain this. So here we are defining a class which is greet. This class is meant to contain functionality related to greeting, means logically saying hello or similar actions. Then the static method decorator tells Python that say hello method does not depend on any instance. This means the function will not access instance variable and it will not modify class level attributes. Hence, it behaves just like normal function, but it is grouped inside the class or logical organization. So essentially, static method says this function belongs to the class, but it does not need any information from the class or its object. And finally, we are calling the static method directly using the class name greet. No object means no instance of the class is needed. You don't need to create any object here because that's unnecessary. So can you tell me what will be the output of this? Okay, so we'll see its output. So the output is hello everyone without creating any object. So now we'll see another example. So in this example we'll use the class name. Okay, so now in this example we are using the class name. So you have to tell its output in the chat that what will be its output. So here we have created a class named square. This class is conceptually related to operation involving square, for example finding the square of a number. Then at static method, this tells the Python that this method does not depend on any instance, does not depend on any class, and this works only with the data explicitly passed to it. So this method simply multiplies the number by itself and returns the result. And at last we are calling the method directly through the class name, not through an object. No need to create an instance like object is equals to square because the method is independent of instance. You can directly pass an argument to it. Okay, so tell me its correct answer. Okay, so let's see what will be the correct answer of this. So the correct answer of this is 36 as the square of 6 is 36. Okay, so now we'll see another example. Now we'll see an example for logical grouping. Okay, so now this is the another example which uses logical grouping. So now you have to answer its output in the chat. I'll also explain this how it uses logical grouping. So here we have defined a class named converter. By its name we can tell that this class will handle conversion related operations such as converting distance, weights and etc. Then what happens conceptually is the decorator, which is the static method, tells Python that this method similarly does not require any reference or does not require any class. It simply performs a calculation using input kilometer. It multiplies the kilometer by 0.621, the approximate conversion factor from the kilometers to miles. So this function belongs logically to the converter class, but it doesn't depend on any object of that class. That's why it's static method. And at last we are calling the static method directly using the class name, not through an instance. You pass the value 10 km as the argument. So you have to answer its output in the chat. Now I have told you what the code is doing, how it works. So I think this would be easy for you all to answer. Okay, so we'll see its output that what you have answered is correct or not. So 6.21 is the correct answer. Those who have answered 6.21, they are correct. Okay, so let's see one more simple example to multiply two numbers. Okay, so now this is another example where we multiply two numbers. So now you have to tell its output in the chat. What will be the output of this code? Okay, so I'll tell you now what will be the output of this. This was also very simple to answer. So the correct answer of this is 20. When we multiply 5 and 4, we get the answer 20. Okay, so now we'll move to another example, which is to find the cube of a number. Similarly, we'll find the cube of a number same as we did the first example. Okay, so now this is the program to find the cube of a number. So you have to tell me its output in the chat. What will be the output of this? Okay, so let's see what will be the correct answer. So the correct answer is 27 because the cube of 3 is 27. So basically in today's class we learned static function are method inside a class that don't need any access to instance, self or class data. They are perfect for utility or helper function that logically belong to a class but don't rely on its object. Benefit of static methods are that call them without creating an object, keep related function organized in a class, and improve code readability and structure. When to use is for independent operation like math, calculation, conversion, greeting or general information methods like we saw in today's all the examples. When not to use is when a method need instance variable or class level data, then use normal class method, not static methods. So if you have any doubt related to today's class, you can ask me right now. Okay, so thank you everyone for attending this session. I hope you all understood static function clearly and you can use them confidently in your Python project. Always remember that static method is equals to no self and no class, just logic inside a class. So if you have any doubt, you can ask me right now. Okay, then we'll meet in the next live session. Till then, keep practicing Python so that you can become master on it. Bye everyone. आजा पूजा.